Hey, and welcome to the show! My name is Hunter Christensen, and you are listening to Prompted, the official podcast of the Writing Prompts section on Reddit.com. Well, here we are on episode 2. This is exciting. We are now a series. This is more than just a one-off thing. But I have to be honest, there's part of that feels like a burden and a responsibility on me to make this episode particularly more awesome, because the people listening, I feel like now have an official listenership now that you've listened to more than one. So we've done a few things to make this episode even better than the last one, I hope, such as introducing a new reader, having some great stories for you, having an awesome interview, and as well introducing a new segment with Ryan Kinder, who will make a reappearance. So I feel like this episode is going to be awesome. I hope you find it awesome. Stick with us. And let's just jump right into the first prompt, why don't we? So for the first prompt, we are going to the archives, and the prompt is simply this. A wife kills her husband. Make me sympathize with both characters. He was drunker than usual. Ordinarily, she would feel relief when he collapsed onto the couch by the TV. That meant he was too drunk to yell and fight. Tonight, she felt no relief. All she could do was watch him from the doorway, hoping he would drink the poisoned whiskey she had just poured him. A lump sat in her throat as she watched his fat belly rise and fall with his labored breath. In his hand, he held the last drink she would ever pour for him. He sat there for a few minutes in silence, without even looking at the glass of whiskey he clutched in his fat fingers. Then, without warning, he downed the entire glass in one movement. He let the glass hit the ground and sighed. He would go to sleep soon. It wouldn't be painful. Nowhere near as painful as the last 23 years had been for her. She wanted him to leave the world peacefully. She still loved him after all. Still, she felt he deserved an explanation. At the very least, he deserved a goodbye. She walked around to the front of the couch. He rolled his half-opened eyes in her direction, and the two stared at each other in silence. "There was more than whiskey in your drink," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm sorry." "Your black eye is healing," he said quietly. "You know I'm sorry about hurting you, don't you?" She nodded. "You were very beautiful once. I can still see it sometimes, when you smile. You don't smile much these days. But when you do, your eyes flash like they did when we were teenagers. It reminds me of how young and beautiful we were. Young, beautiful, and carefree." "Your drink," she said with tears forming in her eyes. "You're dying. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." "I know," he whispered and slowly nodded. "I saw you pour it." She put her hands over her mouth and tried not to cry. "Do you remember that field trip we took, our second year of high school?" he asked. She shook her head. "We spent the whole day together," he said as his voice became fainter. "It was the first time I really met you. There were 50 or 60 of us there, but I only cared about you. On the bus ride home, we sat next to each other. Do you remember now?" She nodded. "Everybody on the bus slept. They were so tired, but not us. We couldn't stop talking to each other. We had so much to say back then. When you started to drift off to sleep, I was sad, but then you said something to me. Do you remember what it was?" She paused to steady her voice. "I'm going to lean on you." "Yeah," he said as a smile slowly spread across his face. "And you fell asleep on my shoulder. I couldn't sleep the whole bus ride because I was so happy that we were having that moment. And I know you didn't sleep either. The bus bounced too much, and back then my arms were muscular. You just wanted to be close to me. I'm sorry I was such a lousy pillow. And I'm sorry I was an even lousier husband. She wanted to say something but could not. His voice slowed even further. He spoke as if he was in a dream. I still love you as much as I did on that bus ride. I just got worse at showing it. I'm sorry. She did not reply. She just stood and tried to compose herself. After a moment, she walked over and sat next to him on the couch. I'm going to lean on you, okay? She whispered. Okay, he replied as she rested her head against his arm. The two sat in silence until his breathing stopped at last. That story was written by the ironically named This Story Will Suck. So for the next story, I thought it better to find someone a little more appropriate to read. So here now we have our new reader, the lovely Elena Howell, to read the response to this prompt. It's the year 2057. Queen Elizabeth still reigns. People are getting suspicious.
Elizabeth 2.0 arched an eyebrow as the assassin's weapon pierced the soft synthetic tissue of her chest. Her attacker recoiled at her apparent indifference, leaving the large wooden stake embedded in her body, right where her heart would have been. Her dress was ruined. A vampire? She held the stake between her thumb and forefinger and plucked it free. Really? There was a tingling sensation in her chest as swarms of nanites rushed to repair the damage that her assailant had caused. They wouldn't be able to fix her dress, though. She took a step forward. Back, foul creature! The assassin stepped backwards, almost tripping over his robes in his haste. He had disguised himself as an Anglican bishop, or perhaps he was an Anglican bishop. They had made no secret of the fact that they thought her surprising longevity suspicious. Elizabeth tried to search for the man's face in the state database, but the Wi-Fi signal in the palace was abysmal. The bishop and/or assassin was now brandishing a silver cross and mumbling something in Latin. Who sent you? Her universal translator had defaulted to Latin also, which only seemed to confirm the man's suspicions that she was some sort of demon. Was it George? We do find his little rebellion amusing, though if this is the best he can throw at us, we are afraid his uprising will be as short as his grandfather's. The silver cross hurtled through the air, slicing through the paper-thin flesh above her left eye and exposing part of the chrome endoskeleton beneath. She sighed in frustration. As though you haven't been rude enough already. She stepped forward again, her fingers slowly forming into long, razor-sharp claws as the nanites shaped and reshaped her flesh. I am the Queen of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. She took another step forward. He took another step back. I am Empress of Europe, Tsarina of Russia, and the Queen of Mars. She drew her hand back, preparing to deliver the killing blow. She hadn't had to shed blood personally since the revolution of 2022. Good times. And you, she concluded, flexing her claws in anticipation, who do you think you are to challenge me? I am a distraction, said the man. Now! Elizabeth felt a hand on the back of her neck, lifting her hair, accessing the hidden USB port that was only ever to be used in case of emergency. She had just enough time to wonder how they had found the plans, the original blueprints that revealed her one weakness, before she felt the virus take hold. As her consciousness fragmented and dissolved, Elizabeth 2.0 fell to her knees. She lost control of her nanites, and they began to wreak havoc, roaming unfettered throughout her systems as her body cannibalized itself.
That story was written by Mr. Mercurial. That's right, it's that time again. It is time for an interview! For today's interview, we have a guy that goes by the name of Fringly online. In real life, he's known as Tom. He's a writer that was spotlighted. He was in the Spotlight feature that we have going on at Writing Prompts several months ago. He's a really cool guy. He has some great pieces of writing if you check out his subreddit. Just so you have a heads up, we were having a tough time with audio on Fringly's end, so at times it's a little difficult to hear what he's saying, but it is still a great interview, and I had a great time speaking with Tom. So with no further ado, here it is. Enjoy! So, Tom, where are you from?
I'm from Scotland, so I was born here, brought up here, and still live here.
Oh, very cool. And what is it you do for work?
I work actually in marketing for a university. Now, I'm not the evil kind of marketing that's trying to convince you to do anything other than come to my university and get educated.
So when and why did you start creative writing?
Well, ever since I was a kid, I've enjoyed writing, and I used to write a lot as a kid. I wrote poetry, which of course now is incredibly cringeworthy, but I then had about a 10-year gap where kind of life got in the way, and then really I found Reddit, and it was just what the Writing Prompt sub was what managed to inspire me to get back into it, and it was just really what I've been wanting to do for a long time.
So how is it that you found Writing Prompts?
I like a lot of other people, I think I stumbled upon, and I just kept on coming across this crazy site which had all sorts of weird things, and I ended up kind of coming on, and I started looking around, and I found the Writing Prompt sub quite quickly, and for about 6 months or so I just lurked. I would just read other people's stories, and I think, wow, these people, how on earth, people just write, and they write so much, and everyone's so nice, and I was still in that kind of, I wish that I could be writing, but I just, I'm not, and I can't be. And then one day I just did.
And how is it that you decide which prompts to respond to now that you write? Because you do write fairly frequently.
I do. I try, when I'm having a good week, it can be 2 or 3 stories a day, generally Monday through Friday. It'll be, I tend to prefer prompts which I haven't had replies to before, simply because I can't stop myself. I love reading prompts almost as much as I love writing them. So if someone else has already written a reply, then I'll just end up reading their prompt, and then it will just, I get their prompt in my head, and I can't write something original. And so I'll either lurk around new, or I'll look back at older prompts, trying to find something to kind of write that I enjoy. And really, it's just often ones which pop in, and I just hear the whole story kind of fully formed in my head, and then I just have to get it out onto the screen as quickly as I can, because it's in there, and it's this compulsion to write.
So do you write outside of Writing Prompts at all?
Well, I write on my own sub. That was I've got an ongoing story on there which started off as a prompt and has now become like 130 odd part story. It's like 160,000 words, and apart from that, I do a little bit of writing aside from that. My current NaNoWriMo story, which is going incredibly poorly, started off just as an idea I had, and I just started writing it, the kind of concept, and then when NaNoWriMo came along, I started kind of getting into it a little bit more. So a little bit, but a lot of my writing is on Writing Prompts, simply because it's so easy to write there.
Well, what motivates you to continue to write, and how do you keep yourself motivated? Because I'm sure you experience, writer's block like everyone does, where you just feel like you hit that wall.
I do, and what really motivates me is just enjoying writing and wanting to keep going. As I mentioned, I had this big gap, and now, I love Reddit, and I love being on the Writing Prompt sub, and so it's just a case that, I find that I think I'm getting better over time. Certainly, I read back my early stories, and so I just want to get better at writing, really, and that's what the sub helps me do.
And have you found that Writing Prompts translates to the writing of other parts of your life, or to your life in general?
Well, I definitely think as I mentioned, working in marketing, it's made me appreciate, I tend to try and write more fluently now, and I think I can craft a story better, which probably helps, do all that nefarious getting into stealing students and bring them to my school. So I think it has helped me become a better writer just generally in my life. But yeah.
So what's the best writing advice that you've come across, or the best writing advice that you'd give to someone else?
It's a tricky one. I mean, the cliche is just keep writing. My best advice would be find an established universe that you're passionate about. When a good prompt comes along for that, write to that prompt and just enjoy it, and don't worry about it too much. But it's really hard because I'd be a total hypocrite to say that I had all that many answers, because I find myself getting stuck on things too.
Well, thank you so much for your time and for letting me be able to interview and pick your brain a bit.
No problem at all. It's been an honor. I was surprised and delighted to be asked.
So now, after having heard a bit from Fringly, I thought you might like to hear one of the stories that he's written. So to set the stage for the story I'm about to share, it's actually an image prompt. We often do these on the site rather than someone writing in sentences. It's an image or a picture or a painting of some sort that the writer goes off of and writes a story or whatever they want in response to that image. For this particular image, there will be a link in the show notes, but for now, let me just describe it to you. It is a bleak painting of a rainy day, and there's a large crowd of people with black umbrellas and dark figures underneath their umbrellas. It's set in a concrete plaza of some sort, possibly in a city, but amongst these black, bleak figures is this one red umbrella with a figure underneath that's holding some kind of suitcase or some kind of bag. And with that, here's the story written by Fringly. At the corner of East 46th and Lexington, I had a little newspaper stand. It wasn't much, just the Post, Times, a few internationals that had easy take-back terms, and the usual assortment of gum, candy, and drinks. Still, it was my business, my life, and I knew everything that went on in or around that stand. Most people think that I see hundreds of thousands of people a day. They all stream in and out of Central Station. How could I possibly keep track? Well, yes and no. Some faces come and go that you never see again, but a few you see a few times and start to remember. The kid, probably in his late 20s, but a kid to me anyway, had been coming by the stand for a few weeks. Paper, water, a pack of smokes, low-tar Coopers. He was always polite, always smiled and put his change in the charity jar if he had any. Good kid. One day, a Saturday, I was surprised to see him walk up and buy a pack of Coopers. He was a strictly weekday type, and so it struck out in my mind. Funny thing was, once he had them, he didn't walk off, but leaned against the side of the booth and lit one up, checking his watch every few minutes. When she arrived, it was easy to see why he'd been nervous. She was a real looker. Tall, blonde, a full package and a half. The only thing that didn't look so great was the shiner she was sporting that she tried to hide with makeup and a wide hat. I could have told her it doesn't work. I spend a lot of time as a kid in the YMCA, and the only thing that'll get a shiner out is time. Still, it was upsetting to see a pretty girl like that, especially a young one like her, no more than 20 or so. When the kid saw her, he got real mad real fast. "I'll beat that son of a bitch into a grave." He tried to push past her, but she held him back and pleaded for him to calm down. "Please, Johnny, he's not worth it. He'll kill you before you could lay a hand on him." That gave Johnny pause. Just come sit with me for a while." The two of them moved across to a bench and split the rest of Johnny's cigarettes, lighting one after another until they were gone, and then so was she. I watched as he walked away and hoped the poor kid had more brains than he seemed to. That kind of girl's trouble. You want to save her, but it'll cost you. From then, it became routine, and Johnny joined my weekend regulars too. Every Saturday he'd be there, 10 a.m., with her arriving soon after. Sometimes she'd be sporting a shiner, sometimes bruises on her arms, always looking hangdog, and it drove Johnny mad. 3 months this went on, and then one Saturday, nothing. No weekend Johnny, no weekday Johnny. No sign of either of them. Another week went past and nothing again. A shame, but kids fall in and out of love all the time. I just hoped the kid was okay and it was just a breakup and he hadn't done something stupid. Saturday, 15th of March, was cold and wet, and when Johnny arrived at the stand, I almost didn't recognize him. Kid had grown a beard and looked tired. Real tired. He huddled under a red umbrella, and it cast a red glow on his face, which highlighted the bags under his eyes. "Hey kid, I missed you recently." He looked surprised that I remembered him. Folk often did. I handed him his Coopers, and he pulled the wrapping off and pulled one out and lit it. He turned away and then paused, then turned back. "Hey, you remember that girl I was with?" I nodded. "Sure, kid, course I do. Hard to forget a pretty girl like that." He smiled. "I'm gonna marry her. Can't tell a soul in the world, but I figure you've got no one to tell that can hurt me." He looked down and the smile grew. "Feels good to tell someone at last. In 15 minutes we'll be on a train and off to a new life." He walked back and shook my hand. "Take care." I looked down and realized he'd slipped me a 50. Damn fool kid, probably needed the money more than I did, but it was a nice thing to do. A sudden crazy urge came over me, and for the first time in a decade I slipped out of the stand and quickly pulled the shutters down, tossing the dailies under to keep them safe. Locking up, I turned and ran after him. In the big open area in Central Station, it wasn't hard to find him again. A red umbrella with a dark figure underneath. Just a small bag at his feet. I held back and moved up a level, keeping myself well away from where he could see me. He stood, scanning the crowd, in the middle of the concourse, waiting for her. Time went past, and soon her 15 minutes were up, and he started to check his watch. Another 10 minutes went past, and he stopped checking. I was frozen, as still as he was. Both of us stood, unable to leave that spot. An hour later, we were both there, and as the clock chimed the hour, he finally looked up. His face was impassive. Without looking around again, he walked away. And after a time, so did I. Hey Ryan, how's it going?
Well, it's going about as well as it possibly can. And you?
Well, I'm doing great considering word on the street is you have a new segment to introduce.
I was totally not prepared for this. I don't even know what you're forcing me to do.
You know. Don't play dumb with me.
Okay, fine. We are going to have an exclusive prompt just for the podcast. How's that sound?
Awesome. Well, let's hear about it.
Okay, here's how it works. Well, first of all, the thing you need to know is that we've actually put up a website for the podcast itself on Reddit. Because, of course, this is a Reddit-based podcast. And if you don't know what Reddit is, it's basically a site for people to post cat pictures and to tell stories in the Writing Prompts subreddit. That's all it's for, just those two things. But we've created a subreddit at reddit.com/r/prompted. And if you go there, you can subscribe and you'll see posts that are dedicated to the show. And one of the posts that you'll see at the top will be the podcast prompt, which this episode will have a specific prompt. The next episode will have a specific prompt. And the point of it is you get prompted, you respond to it, and we will read it on the show itself.
Yeah, exactly. So every episode we have an exclusive prompt that is only going to be read on the show itself. So for the listeners, it's kind of an exclusive thing that you have to exercise your writing abilities and have that chance of being read on the show and becoming one of our segments.
Exactly. And then, of course, once your story is read, you will gather your friends around a crackling fire, open a nice Bordeaux, and listen to one of our silky smooth voices read your work.
That's a requirement. There needs to be a fire, and you need to be sitting around it if your prompt and story is read on the air.
Yes, but even if your prompt, if your story is not read on air, you should still gather the friends around the fireplace and make a tradition of listening to this podcast.
We're really just promoting firesides.
Yes, exactly. I mean, firesides are just so warm and comforting, especially in the summer.
Indeed. So what is the prompt for this episode?
Okay, the prompt for this episode is actually a constrained writing prompt. And that means that there's a specific limit on it, and I'll tell you the limit after the prompt. But first, the prompt. The prompt is, an inanimate object comes to life at an inappropriate time. Now, I know what you're thinking.
Toilet paper.
Toilet paper, precisely. That's what everybody thinks of the first time. Avoid that if you can. If you can't, if we've just put that in your head, whatever, roll with it. But here is the constraint. It needs to be 75 words. Your story cannot go over 75. Your story cannot be under 75. It must be precisely 75 words. Now, of course, something like this, it helps because if you write too much, you're kind of learning how to edit yourself and bring it back down. If you write too little, then you learn how to sort of build upon what you did before. So something like this, constrained writing prompts can really help. You could do it for your own sort of prompts. If you find a prompt on the subreddit and you really want to challenge yourself, add a few constraints. That is just trust me. It's a good tip. It's a good tip. Just trust me.
So yeah, there you go, listeners. A new feature, Respond Away. The link will be in the show description. It will be in the podcast. It will be on the new podcast subreddit. Basically, if you're listening to the show, there's going to be a way to find the link to write a response to that prompt. So good luck.
Yeah, I can't wait to see what people come up with.
So, once again, that prompt was, an inanimate object comes to life at an inappropriate time. Good luck, ladies and gentlemen. We look forward to reading your responses. For those of you who are interested in even more prompts such as that, you can check out Ryan's book, 1000 Awesome Writing Prompts, which is available on Amazon. Check it out. It's pretty great. If you're looking for the link to submit your response, check out the show notes, or simply go to reddit.com/r/prompted. And that's the end of our show. Did we do okay? You can let us know, leave us a comment, and please rate us on iTunes. You can also share it with people that you love or don't love. Who knows, maybe it's just the spark that you need. The show is produced and hosted by myself, Hunter Christensen. Thanks so much to Elena Howell for lending her voice talent to the show. Thanks so much to Fringly for letting me interview him. And thank you to all the writers who contributed to the show. That's all I got. Stay creative, everyone. Word on the street is you have a new segment to introduce. I'm sorry, can we restart this? This is horrendous.
Sure.
I'm so sorry. Okay. Hey, Ryan, how's it going?
Oh, it's going well. I'm sorry.
Going.